Thanks for listening to Games by Design. This podcast is kind of our journal that we use to collect and record our own game design thoughts and the lessons that we learn while trying to make some of our own games on the side. And we put it on YouTube so you can join us on that journey. Today I'm joined by the guy behind our soundtracks and sounds, and that's Noah. Hey, Noah.
Hey.
As well as Nick, who's responsible for the visual style and design of our recent projects. Hi, Nick.
Hello.
And we're also really grateful to have another friend back with us after a long absence due to scheduling conflicts. And so please welcome our friend and longtime co-host of the show, Aaron.
Hello. Great to be back.
Glad to have you back. I'm really glad we finally got you back on the show. Today we're watching some footage about the game that is very likely responsible for launching the Elder Scrolls into the modern age, and without which there wouldn't be Skyrim, the gaming juggernaut that we can't seem to shut up about. I'm talking, of course, about Bethesda's 2002 Game of the Year, Morrowind, which we can see on the screen right now. So to begin with, guys, Morrowind was a revelation to me when I played it as a teenager. Then there have been since then very few games that have transported me so completely to another world. So today I wanted to ask you guys about your own experiences. And Noah, I want to start with you. Mm-hmm. What game world has most pulled you in and made you feel that it was real?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, and it was weird. I kind of developed a couple answers based on certain requirements for not aliveness, but for sucking me in. And my first thought that I had was Breath of the Wild, which I thought was interesting because we've talked about Breath of the Wild like a ton already. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we've even touched on in the past is how it feels empty but still alive. It's not like Red Dead Redemption where there's lots of character moments and characters moving around and bits and pieces and things that are happening all the time. It's a pretty it's a pretty quiet world. There's not like a lot happening that will necessarily pull me in narratively. But I think that something that they really nailed in that game was the nature and the soundscape. And I didn't realize how important that was to me until I played games that were lesser and didn't put as much emphasis on like the soundscape and really nailing what it feels like to like just, walk around in between trees and whatnot and roll down hills and all that fun gallivanting. And I don't know, I thought that was the first one that came to mind solely based off of particularly sound design and I don't know, just the way they constructed the open world. I found myself feeling like it was real more than any other open world that I've ever really wandered around in.
Big surprise that the sound guy is talking about sound right out the gate. I'll put money that Nick is going to talk about the art direction of the game that he picks. Yeah, that's a good one. So you're talking about the soundscape made it feel real. You said the design of it made it feel like it was a place that you sucked into. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts about how that game managed such deep immersion for you?
I don't know. I was really mulling this over and having a hard time coming up with an answer beyond the effects, as it were. Like even just watching this Morrowind gameplay right now. What it's doing right now is extremely bold, and a lot of games don't do this, where you go to a town and there's this endless sandstorm blowing over you and it's noisy, but it really pulls you in. It's something that I think that Morrowind does really well that some of the later Elder Scrolls don't quite as commit to, is this sense of like particular place. And every time you're in this place, all of the effects, the visual effects and the auditory effects come together to sell you on this is the place that you're in right now walking around.
I completely like this idea of of a distinct place at the expense of potentially comfort or gameplay familiarity. Like this idea that like games should be open and you should be able to see things clearly and they should be well navigable and all of those sorts of things. And we've got this raging sandstorm that is noisy and in your face and in the way. But it does give it such a sense of place. And Noah and I just finished playing through the Silent Hill 2 remake. And
you finished?
Yes, we did.
Just last night.
True. And that game is not friendly in its environment design, in the way it looks. It's foggy or it's dark and your flashlight casts a beam of literally 3 feet. It's just, and every area is worse than the last and is so unintuitive sometimes. But like there is such a sense of place. Like there's a reason that Silent Hill is such a household name when it comes to immersive horror. I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's more to do with the locations than it is to do with the weird, freaky, fleshy monsters and a lot of other things.
Let me sum up what you just said there. So you said that at the expense of ease of navigation and like obviousness of, you know, what you are to do in this place, both Morrowind and to probably a great extent Silent Hill 2, they've put emphasis on being distinct and interesting and frequently confusing and baffling and difficult. And that makes it feel to you that they're real. That they're real because in the real world perhaps there's that level of difficulty and confusion and weirdness and uniqueness about, you know, about that kind of stuff. Is that kind of what you're saying there?
I don't know if it's a parallel with like reality so much as it's just distinct, right? It's not the same as everything else in game. And so like Silent Hill doesn't feel real to me. It just feels not like, you know, Assassin's Creed or Far Cry or Skyrim, it's like Skyrim, for instance, I feel like has is pretty consistent in the approachability of all of the different places in its game. Yeah, I don't know. We can dig into this more later. I didn't want to derail us too much, but those are just some stray thoughts.
Thanks for your thoughts. That's very interesting. So it's very interesting. Well, let's just talk a little bit about Breath of the Wild a little bit more before we move on. But so you guys, all of us have played Breath of the Wild, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And I'm curious if Aaron, have you had the similar experience to Noah's that, you know, the game drew you in, and if so, was it the sound that did it, or was it something else or the other effects Noah was talking about, or is it something else that made you feel like that world, you know, dragged you in and made you feel like it was real?
No, yeah, for sure. When you asked us to think about a game that really drew us in, really had immersion, Breath of the Wild was definitely one of the ones I thought about as well. And there is definitely something with the atmosphere of that game. I think, you know, we talk a lot about atmosphere. I think it's really tied to immersion, and it kind of is a bit of a nebulous thing, but I think, the art direction, the sound, how it feels in the world, how, you know, you feel like you inhabit that space, I think really, really goes with that. And I think another thing that Breath of the Wild really has working for it, that's sometimes seen as a criticism, is that feeling of isolation. I think that when a game allows you to just take it in without constantly needing your attention or, you know, having you need to go do a quest or talk to an NPC, but you can just exist in the world in a natural sense. I think that really helps with the immersion. And Breath of the Wild has a lot of those moments where you feel compelled to just exist in the world and just explore around, find things based on what you're interested in seeing, and rather than what the game's telling you to do. And so that feels, you have a little bit more of an ownership there. And I really think the isolation helps with that. Because I was thinking of some games that allow you to skip a lot of the emptiness, a lot of the isolation, games that give you fast travel early on, whereas games that kind of, you know, allow you to exist in that either by not giving you those options or encouraging the use. And I think that the immersion is much greater in the latter instance of those games, and I think Breath of the Wild does that really well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you bring up one of Breath of the Wild's strengths it was a couple episodes ago. It was our episode we were talking about Deus Ex, and Nick mentioned, I think he said that Breath of the Wild's world doesn't feel like alive or lived in, but it does feel like appropriate. And that was kind of the reversal, the twist there of that conversation. It was like I was saying Breath of the Wild doesn't feel alive to me because doesn't have all these like life in it, you know, whatever. And so we were trying to figure out how to make games feel alive, and then Nick was like, well, it doesn't need to, and it's appropriate that it doesn't because it's a ruined, you know, apocalyptic kind of world, and that is right for that game. So yeah, I think you're right. I think that and Silent Hill is, I'm sure, the same way. It's not like it's supposed to feel like a bustling metropolitan area. It's supposed to feel like this dreamlike, isolated horrorscape of, you know, all these monsters and unique, freaky locations that I'm entirely too scared to explore myself.
We were too, for the record. That's why we did it together.
So, Noah, if you're okay with me moving on, I'm going to ask Nick
please.
about his game now. Nick, your game. What game world has pulled you in the most and made you feel like it was real?
So Outer Wilds is this game that I don't know if I've mentioned before. But,
Never heard of it.
Yeah, really. Oh, sorry, I thought really hard about some other stuff, but this one takes the cake, which is so funny because Outer Worlds, I can remember the name of my favorite game. Outer Wilds is, it's not a particular, like kind of we talked about, it's not a particularly bustling game. You know, I feel like I could count the number of characters on my fingers, but and I'm not sure exactly how this ties in with the other stuff we've been discussing. Maybe we can explore some connections there. But what I was going to say is so compelling to me about Outer Wilds, and what makes it feel like, I keep almost saying Outer Worlds, like the word is coming out of my mouth, like Outer Worlds. What is compelling to me is that the solar system just exists independent of you and continues to function independent of you, and like, there's just stuff that happens, right? There are these, since you're in this little, this 20-minute loop, you can see a lot of, like, you have the opportunity to see a lot of things that you might miss, since you're playing it over and over and over again. But every time, I'm not going to spoil, but every time this crazy thing's going to happen, and something's going to happen on this planet, and you'll be over on this planet, so you won't even have any idea that that's happening over on that planet, but it happens every loop, right? And it's just a very big, I feel like it's appropriate to the game, it's a very big, uncaring solar system. There's a big, and all the places are very distinct, so that helps too. What is compelling to me is that it systemically functions without your input. Like, you could just stand there and interesting things would happen around you every cycle.
It's almost like the effect that you have, I would assume, because I haven't done this, but playing games like Dwarf Fortress, the wheels keep on churning and turning, whatever you do, and it doesn't really take into account that you're a player. It just treats you like it's anything else, like you're anything else.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And it's not that, and Outer Wilds isn't totally impartial, right? Like, it's all there to be interacted with. Like, it's all made for interesting interactions. They want you to go and see all of the cool things, but it's particularly magical when something crazy happens that you had zero input on, just because that you just happened to observe. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I agree. That game was really something special. It was fun to to try to play it 3 times and then finally get through it on the last one. Well, you didn't mention art direction. So
no, I didn't. Sorry to disappoint.
I lost money.
Although it's got some of the best
money.
That's great. Thank you. We'll go ahead and we'll move on to Aaron's game now. So, Aaron, what game has pulled you in the most, and why and how did it do that?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this, and games I thought about Breath of Wild. I definitely thought about Outer Wilds. There is something really cool about a world that just doesn't care about you, that isn't curated for your enjoyment, that is harsh and existing on its own. But to give a counter example from what I said before, talking about how I think the isolation really helps in Breath of Wild, I think the harsh, not caring about your universe works in Outer Wilds. A game I think really, immersed me despite a lot of things working against it is Cyberpunk 2077.
Mm-hmm.
And on the surface, especially with how that game was at launch, which is where I played the most of it, there's a lot of things working against it, things that you think would take you out immersion-wise. There was a lot of bugs, there was a lot of visual glitches, there was a lot of NPCs that were, running around in circles or T-posing. But despite all of that, I had never played a game that really felt like such a tangible, real city environment. Even something like, Grand Theft Auto still kind of felt like a playground in a sense, even though it's like, this basically just feels like California. It still feels like, here's like a bunch of toys for you to wreak havoc with, cause mayhem. But something about Night City in Cyberpunk 2077, something about its atmosphere, something about its design, just a feeling of walking around, the feeling of driving around. You feel like a real part of the city, somebody who's lived there, somebody who exists in it, somebody that has to navigate through and live. And I think it's really cool. There are a lot of things I think also that help with the immersion. I think the writing and the characters in that game work really well, and particularly how they are animated and cutscenes and interactions, that you feel like you're talking to real people and having this interaction, and so that when you're on your own, you feel part of that. But again, kind of similar to Breath of the Wild, it is the moments where you're not actively engaged in something the game wants you to do or actively following the story, but in those moments, I'm just riding around first person on a motorcycle and try not to crash into cars in front of me, or there's moments where you can kind of sit as a passenger in a car and just kind of look as the city passes the window. There's something really that taps into a really common experience, in those moments. How many times have we been driving through a city just looking out the window, scene as the world passes by that I think is really cool. And something else I was thinking about in that game. I was wondering about immersion, whether it makes a difference, whether it's like a first-person game or a third-person game, or how it. Because you would think, oh, if it's first-person, that feels more like me, and so that would automatically be more immersive. But then we talk about games, Breath of the Wild, that are third-person, or games where you create a character like Skyrim or Morrowind, or other games where you have a more bespoke character. And I think there's something interesting. Cyberpunk, it is first person, but it is also bespoke character that you design, but who has already kind of their own identity and a bit of a more set way of doing things. And I think that's something really cool about being immersed in another character, like not just supplanting yourself into a game, but really immersing yourself in the world that this character inhabits, that their relationships are, and the choices and things that they make. I think there's something really cool about that I think the game does really well.
You got me kind of thinking. You were talking about that common experience that people have driving through cities and everything. Noah, you've played some Cyberpunk as well, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I know that so we grew up in like the San Francisco Bay Area, did a lot of city driving, night driving, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you also experienced that same sense that Aaron's describing, like that common kind of feeling of. Did you find that relation as well? Did you feel that same feeling that you had, growing up in the city and then driving around Night City?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, Aaron. I've never really thought about Cyberpunk that way, but that is true. Actually, one of my favorite things about that game is driving through the city. I think that. Gosh, I've never even thought about that before. But yeah, no, I do motorcycles because I think motorcycles are cool in Cyberpunk because they are. I'll sometimes I'll third person so I can really appreciate it. But I love driving first person in that game because it feels so, I don't know, it does feel intimate, just and it feels very, very shared, as Aaron said, like a real, like, I don't know. A lot of the times it's hard to identify with a game, and certainly the rest of Cyberpunk it's hard to identify with. I have never had super metal implants in my brain or Keanu Reeves talking to me.
Keep up.
But unfortunately, but I have been in a car and it captured, as mundane and banal as this is, it captured what it feels like to be in a car, and that means something. I think it genuinely does. I wrote down something that I had, and just while Aaron was talking, do you mind if I just a little blurb that I thought, as Aaron was describing this, driving around and stuff, and hearkening back to what I said when I first started, I think to me, a truly immersive game, as in specifically a game that pulls me in, not a game that is totally accurate or a game that is totally simulated, but a truly immersive game is one that commits every facet of its existence to the meaning of the particular moment that you're in. And so I think that is what makes driving around in Night City so cool in Cyberpunk, and that's what makes walking around in Breath of the Wild so special, because it feels like the entire game is really pushing on that moment, like, and so everything's coming together, the music, the soundscape, the movement, the gameplay itself, like it's all coming together to make this concentrated diamond of an experience. And I think that's what like really is proper immersion for me.
It's not about like the grand things, it's about those little like tiny intimate moments of the game for you.
Yeah, I think so, at least for me. Yeah.
I actually think I agree with you, and I was watching something recently about describing how about like Skyrim's a cozy game, right? Skyrim, I told you I was going to come back to Skyrim. But it's a cozy game because it's you spend so much time like just going about the daily life with your character, like those are the moments that people kind of love and relate to. And our last video not our last video, but especially not by the time this one comes out, but we had a video somewhat recently about how to end an open world game, and several of the comments on there were people talking about how they ended their Skyrim playthrough, specifically how they came up with a satisfying conclusion for themselves. And a lot of it was like, I settled down, I retired, I got married, I went and I sat down in front of my fireplace, or I went out on the balcony and I took a screenshot, which I just thought was a great idea. And then I finished the game. Like, that was it. Like, I never picked it up again. That was the end of my Skyrim playthrough. And they were describing these little mundane, saying goodbye kind of moments for their characters. They go back to their house, they have a snack, they drink some skooma or whatever, and then that's it.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was really interesting, and I think that maybe, Noah, you're right, that a lot of the time a game feels immersive because it pulls you into the specific, what did you said, like the facets of that moment,
yeah.
the meaning of that moment. Yeah, I quite like that. Nick, do you have something to say?
I think that I do as it happens. We'll see if it's interesting.
Yeah, I could sense it.
There's a disturbance in the airwaves
In the
across the internet. I think there's something compelling about. This is a funny sentence. I think there's something compelling about mundanity. There's something certainly relatable in it. And so if you're trying to find something that like really digs its claws into you and makes you feel like you're experiencing a world in the same way you might experience our world, it's got to be more than one. It can't all be exciting. It can't all be crazy bombast. I think there's a reason that cozy games are games about generally doing very mild, normal things: farming, watering crops, fishing, chatting with your neighbors, Animal Crossing, stuff like that. And I think the elements of Skyrim that I would say make it a cozy game are things like item maintenance, going to the store, running errands, resupplying your stock, like getting rest. And all that kind of stuff. And so certainly not the moments when you're fighting dragons. That's not quite the same. I wouldn't say those are cozy moments. But I think they're the moments. It's like when you're watching a movie and there's like two characters and they're like action heroes and they're like blowing stuff up and jumping through helicopters, like killing demons or whatever. And then there's like a quiet moment and they like have a brief conversation. It's very like mild, or like, someone's washing dishes or something. And often these are like the scenes that like really endear you to those characters, like really, or endear them to you. I don't know how English works. The point is that you like them. But they're often like quiet moments. They're often like little things. And I'm having a heck of a time coming up with an example. So if someone's got one, that's great.
Well, there's the shawarma bit at the end of that the first Avengers movie, right?
Oh, the shawarma, yeah. Well,
they're all just having an awkward lunch after they save the world.
I was going to say literally any Studio Ghibli movie.
Yeah.
I mean, how many of those have... Everyone's favorite scenes in those movies are the cooking scenes, where not just because the food looks amazing, but I think also for that reason, Nick.
Yeah, it kind of pulls you into that moment, like you were saying, Noah. It's like these little details and these yeah, that's really interesting. It's almost like these for immersion and for pulling you into the world. It's not like Nick was saying, it's not about the bombast and the excitement and everything. It's about just like zooming in on things. I actually really agree. And the game that I picked to talk about today, if we have some time here, I think we got a couple of minutes left, is Kingdom Come Deliverance, because in that game, and there's a lot of stuff that makes it feel immersive to me, but I'll zoom in on one thing right here. The mechanics are deep. You have to worry about eating, you have to maintain your armors and weapons and manage your reputation and everything. These kind of challenges, they're challenging, and so they kind of like pull you in. And a lot of the time it's like a proper like mini game. And that actually, I really, really like it, and because it forces you to like zoom in even more on the details of being a medieval peasant blacksmith in Bohemia. So like you're sharpening your sword. You have to sharpen your sword to keep it in good condition. You have to like sit down at the grindstone, and you have to press a button that like pumps the grindstone so that it turns, and then you have to angle the sword just right so that it sharpens instead of makes it duller, and if you do it wrong it dulls it down and whatever. I think my favorite minigame in that game is the alchemy one, where you have like your book sitting just to one side, and you have to like turn the camera to turn your head to check it for the recipe that you're making, so that you do things in the right order. You like grind up the ingredients, and with your mortar and pestle you have to add them to the pot in the right order. You have to heat the potion to just the right heat for just the right amount of time with these bellows and whatever. It's totally awesome. And it totally puts you like that moment right there is, I think, almost like one of the most extreme and effective examples of what we're talking about right here, with zoomed in details and meanings of the meaningful moments that Noah was chatting about, where I feel like I'm Henry the Hungry Blacksmith, like I'm picking up the ingredients, I'm putting them in the pot, and just like the detail there of that mundane, normal, everyday task is what makes me feel like that game is a real place with real people in it, and that works really well for me.
That's really cool. I need to play that one.
Yeah,
and the second one just came out.
But yeah, that's all the time. Looks like our footage is ended. It's all the time that we have for our conversation today. We'll just real quick. Do you guys have like a one sentence recommendation for some games for our Think of a Good Game segment? We'll go ahead and start with you, Nick. Do you have one?
Oh yeah, if you haven't played it already and you want to treat yourself to some crazy hallucinogenic Wild Times Katamari Damacy is a total blast.
Awesome. All right, Aaron, what about you?
Another Crab's Treasure. Cute little Souls-like with surprising depth and mechanic. Enjoyed it.
Why have I heard of that?
It came out last year.
Weird. Yeah, maybe Donkey covered it or something.
Probably.
Awesome, thanks. Noah, how about you?
If you haven't played it already and you want to have a crazy, like Nick said, fever dream and it's bananas and goofy, Silent Hill 2 remake is really, really good. I was very impressed. It'll scare your pants off.
Yeah, I was. My pants were already off before I started. So I came to this podcast pants off.
We're prepared.
All right, guys. Thanks for chatting with me about games today and about Immersion. We'll call it here. But thanks for listening to Games by Design, and we'll see you guys next time.